Okay, so this video is not really going to be like a no-fap related video. Now I'm not really sure if I'm going to upload this actual recording, eventually, but so predominantly been doing no-fap vlogs, but I've been considering venturing into making some vlogs where I discuss my perspective on certain issues, and I'm going to try and keep things as meta as possible because my thing isn't really about one faction versus another. It's not about one group or another, one party or another. It's more about like viewing trends and seeing where things are going and like why I think that way, or why I have a certain perspective on different issues or what have you. And I think the thing I wanted to really talk about, and sort of the reason why I'm even considering getting into subjects like this, part of it has to do with having some discussions with a friend of mine who comments on a lot of my videos. You probably know him if you for the small group of subscribers I have, even smaller percentage who are regular viewers. It's Alex. It's one source of inspiration, or one reason why I'm considering going into this. But the other is at work. There's people I spend the most time around, my coworkers, and we oftentimes, when we're on break or we're sitting there, some processes running on one of the machines, you start shooting the breeze and you get people's perspective on things. And obviously most of my coworkers are either significantly younger than me, they're in their 20s, maybe just graduated from college. I think a couple of them might be like just out of high school, but like I don't know if they're in college or if they're just doing it part-time or what have you, or they're significantly older, like 40s or 50s, that sort of thing. And so you don't run into a lot of 30-something-year-olds who are working at a place like this or a job like this. And like the two times I have had coworkers in that age bracket, one of them I got along with really well. This other one, we're meshing pretty decently. I have to train him on different processes and that sort of thing. And since I do overtime, I end up on the side of the week that he works on. But it's kind of funny because maybe it's me sort of like getting to the actual meat of this video, or the actual the topic. But it was sort of like, I think it was after the first or second day that I was training him on stuff, and we were like shooting the breeze, talking about different stuff and different perspectives coming up and all that sort of stuff on different issues. And after that I was kind of joking with some other coworkers because he was on our shift for a short bit, but then he went back to his home shift and started working there. But it's kind of like people have that that sort of, there's that expression out there, damn punks, they ruin punk, sort of a deal. Or insert whatever you want into that sort of expression. And, it was almost like talking to someone of that age bracket it's almost like, this guy's like about a year younger than me. I think the other coworker, he was about like a year older than me. But in this case, it was almost like having a mirror held up to myself, and this is what I sound like, or can sound like, or used to sound like. This is what people think millennials sound like. And I was gonna title this video like "I don't like my generation," but it's a lot more complex than that. It's not a matter of like a millennial hating millennials per se. And of course, there was other conversation that I wasn't a part of, but I kind of overheard this other day. I think it was sort of, a series of these kind of led to sort of brainstorming of, some ideas or just thoughts, hence why, I call this like deep thoughts with Askesis Catharsis. that sort of series. But there's another employee who was talking about how, like, millennials hate being called millennials, and he doesn't consider himself a millennial. He wants to claim that he's Gen X because all his friends are Gen X, and um, I was at a later time after actually we were working with this new hire for a couple days. I jokingly said to one of the coworkers on my home shift that it's like like I'm millennial and like I don't like millennials, or like I'm a millennial and like you know I don't like my generation, or I'm like an atypical millennial, if you want to put me in that sort of under that label or so, or like I use like the expression damn millennials, they ruin millennials, and I was kind of laughing about that. It was almost like a bit kind of self-deprecating in a sense, or just almost like maybe ironic in a sense. But it was sort of seeing or hearing, but more like, well, people say, oh, see what that guy says, I know you heard what he said, so I'm going to try to use the proper English. But hearing like someone who is literally like expressing the views that are associated with people in my generation, and then like me looking at that and like not looking at, hearing that. Once again, I gotta use proper English. Hearing that and like cringing at it, not agreeing with it. Like we talked a bit about like student loan debt and that sort of thing, because he kind of mapped out some of his financial situation. Obviously, like when I'm there and I'm talking about this stuff, I try and stay as tangential or surface level. I don't really break it down, itemize, go into excruciating detail, because obviously I'm there to do my work. I'm there to train him. Like I also have the perspective on work that it's you go there to make money. Maybe you want to do something purposeful, meaningful, efficacious, cool, interesting, something that fires up the neurons in your brain, in your nervous system, that sort of thing. But by and large, you go there to do work, not not foment a revolution or get into some sort of heated debate about whatever. But I just saw the sort of contrast and sort of perspectives on that, and it's sort of like talking to folks like that makes me, it almost makes me like it causes me to sort of empathize with the other guy who's saying, that he doesn't consider himself, a millennial. And, millennial's a dirty word and that sort of thing. Because, like for instance, I've expressed like the notion that, and this, this many ways as sort of aligned with my getting involved with NoFap and being, as serious about it as I can be, insofar as, I've had to sort of adopt this like stoic attitude, or attempt to cultivate a stoic mindset. Not expecting anyone to ride into my rescue, that I'm going to have to take life by the horns and confront the brute facts of life, and the stuff that about life that is not comfy, cozy, nice, all that. Not go around expecting certain things, not being entitled, like, oh, why is it that in my 30s I don't have the attractive, loyal, loving, kind wife with the 2 or even 3 kids, and the 2-story house, white picket fence in the suburbs, and the 6-figure income, and why do I have all this debt? Why, it's like I went through that sort of phase, and then for some reason, somewhere along there, I don't know what. Maybe it was going on NoFap that sort of started some process of mindset change, something. Maybe it was getting red pilled about women. Maybe it was reading the Rational Male. I don't know what, but something along there somewhere, it got to the point where I was like, you know what, this sucks. I don't like it. I don't like the fact that when I was finally able to graduate from college after having to deal with so much, so many setbacks, whether self-inflicted or otherwise, that now I got, 6 figures of debt, most of it's student loan debt, federally insured. I can't get out of that. It sticks with you until you pay it off, etc., etc. I was really frustrated, depressed, angry, etc., etc. But I looked at that, and instead of going, oh, I want some hero to swoop in and save me, I was like, well, let's get a job, preferably decent paying and preferably, related to or connected to um, my degree, and let's get to work and let's make that money. Let's make that money, and we're gonna throw as much of it as I can at that debt. We're gonna pay that stuff off, and we're gonna get down to business. We're gonna get ourselves out of debt. We're going to, following that, presumably stack enough cash for an emergency fund. Then we're gonna stack enough cash to make some financial moves. Make enough money to buy a land in the country, get out of the city, whatever it is. Once we get to that stage, we'll up the level of that plan. We'll have taken that to the next stage and map that out, that sort of thing. And I think, like, some ways I had to say, honestly, I've been kind of lucky. I had a dad who was willing to kick my butt, kick my misguided notions, so to speak, to the curb in many cases, so that I did not go and not only get into that massive amount of student loan debt, but also get it for a degree that is economically unviable. So I was lucky with that. But I also had to do a lot of hard work. I had to make a lot of sacrifices, so there's like that sort of both sides of it deal there, where it's like, okay, lucky that, for instance, parents are still together. They did their darndest to raise me right. Sometimes things went haywire. Sometimes they went too far in this or that. They've admitted as much. They've been honest with me about that, recent years. Tried to make my peace with all that sort of stuff. But in other ways, I also got lucky to have a decent upbringing. But again, I had to do my work. I had to make my effort. I had to make sacrifices, that sort of thing. And maybe it's sort of like, maybe that's the thing, seeing a light at the end of the tunnel that is not, me expiring, so to speak, but, that's a bright future that I'm building myself towards, But going through that whole process where I started really making those actual efforts, making those moves, making that progress, it's like that whole process has sort of changed my opinion on things, And of course, like, I think back to my grandparents, particularly on my mom's side, who grew up through the Great Depression, fought in World War II. They weren't perfect people. They weren't, saints walking upon the earth, but I would like to think, at least, my grandma right now, she's still around. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for any time I get to have a conversation with her, even if it's just 5 minutes out of my day. I'm grateful for that. But my grandpa, when he passed away when I was 5, United States Navy, World War II veteran. And I think about them. I think about that generation and all that, the hell they went through. And I'm sure, like, there were even other levels to it. But see, like, I think there was a unifying sort of, it was the unifying series of hardships that pretty much everybody went through. Some more, some less, Of course, you talk to a millennial, I'm sorry to say, at least, if you were to consider some of my coworkers as representative of, that perspective, in particular this one guy, they would look at that and they would probably try and bring all other demographic identifiers into it to try to make it seem like, well, actually, yours is all other, well, and, your grandpa must have benefited from the GI Bill because blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, actually, he didn't, But all that stuff aside, which is kind of like, again, why I take issue with a lot of what, and I say stereotypical millennial perspective, I take issue with a lot of what the stereotypical millennial perspective is on society, history, politics, religion, etc., etc. But I think about my grandparents and all they went through and all they overcame, and so much of what came out of that. And I see like parallels between folks in my age bracket. It's like, what's that saying that hard times make strong men make good times make weak men make hard times. um, and I'm not sitting here saying that I don't think there are injustices out there, or that there's not times where I want to tell folks from older generations to go pound sand or whatever, or that I'm not never gonna ever speak out against anything that's happening to people of a specific demographic identifier more than others, or that I don't find that egregious or frustrating or something that makes me angry or what have you, whatever that specific group is. But at the same time, I look at the world and I see like, okay, yeah, we're in a really tough time relative to, let's say, the last 50 years, over the course of the last 50 years, not gonna even try to compare it to my grandparents necessarily, their time, or times before that. But it's like, unless I were to end up with some sort of major medical condition or something like that, I look at it and go, okay, like, life's giving me these lemons, I gotta make some lemonade. These are hard times, and the only real way to survive and prosper and make something out of it is to become one of those strong men or strong women. If you want to, we can, or whatever demographic you want to, strong person. I'll put it out there. I despise the fact that we can't just speak plainly these days, but when it comes to your language, your manner of expressing yourself, I don't want the point of trying to get across for it to get lost in semantic arguments like, oh, well, why did you use this term over another term, and well, you're not including all of these other, whatever. It's like, I what I'm saying. Strong individual. Hard times make strong individuals. Strong individuals make good times. Good times make weak individuals. Weak individuals make hard times. If you want to put it like that, so be it. But I hope you understand my point, whoever out there is watching this. But I think that's been sort of the dividing point, which is why me and my sort of, way of looking at things, I oftentimes, like, I'll be like, yeah, they got a point about this or that, but after a point, it's just kind of like, okay, like, are you gonna just sit there and complain all the time? Critique and complain, etc., etc., etc. Is that all we're gonna do here? And what are you gonna do if you yourself are in a position of wealth and power? What are you gonna do? Are you gonna perpetuate the problems, or are you gonna, are you gonna be one of those folks who's like, oh, everything's so unjust and unfair, but then once you suddenly have the millions, you're like okay with it, or what, that sort of thing. It's kind of like, okay, hotshot, what's your plan? That sort of deal. Because, like, I get it. In many ways, I agree with a lot of the critiques and the criticisms and the issues that people have. But at the same time, on the flip side, I kind of wonder at a lot of these, folks, again, my generation, who made the kinds of decisions that in retrospect, it's kind of like, well, what were you expecting? If you go to film school, for instance, and you're having to fork over 150K or whatever for some degree, like, don't you understand it's a scam? I mean, so many great filmmakers, to use that example, they made great films that never went to film school. I think about Quentin Tarantino off the top of my head. Making Kill Bill and a whole slew of other films. I mean, you can go look at his filmography. Never went to film school. Never. Does that mean that, you can just be the next Quentin Tarantino? No, it doesn't. It's one of those fields where there's like no real guarantee of anything. If you get an engineering degree, I'm not saying there's a guarantee that you'll literally work as an engineer, but you'll at least be able to do, presumably, barring some major economic collapse or so, or some really, really tough times, you'll be able to do something with it. Something that's at least related to it, most likely. There's some sort of, you can expect a certain level of something. Not 100%, mind you, but something. Whereas you go into some of these other degree programs and it's like, it's like I'm reminded of that scene from Good Will Hunting where Matt Damon's character bests that snooty rich kid. It's like, you could have learned all of that for $1.25 in late fees at the library. This is obviously back in the 90s, but it's like a lot of these things. It's like, okay, like what did you expect was going to happen if you went into some insert XYZ degree program that doesn't have an actual guaranteed sort of, okay, once you graduate, this is the field you're going to go into. Here's what you're going to do. Especially since so much of this stuff has kind of become something of a scam. Like, what did you expect, I don't know. Though at the same time, I kind of, feel for a lot of people, yeah, there should be some sort of, negative consequences, if you will, but, at the same time, I can kind of agree to a certain extent that it shouldn't be, a lifelong sentence, where it's like, okay, now you're 150K in debt, and you're most likely never going to make more than 40 or 50K a year if you're lucky, and, you're never going to be able to pay that off unless you scrimp and work overtime and you eat nothing but rice and beans for 6 years or 7 years or 10 years. Like, most people just don't have that kind of stamina, to be able to do that. They just don't. And we're not even talking about eating rice and beans and scrimping and saving and working overtime for 10 years so you can become a millionaire or a billionaire. We're talking about doing that just so you can be at the starting line, so you can be at at square zero, square one. So I get some of that, and I get some of their critiques. I mean, this guy out and out identifies himself as a democratic, socialist leaning type. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I don't put labels on myself as to where I lean. It's like, I think a lot of this stuff just doesn't mean anything anymore. So much of it is really about okay, is your tribe in power in a given sphere? It doesn't even have to be politics. It can be the corporate sphere, or it can be the economic sphere, or it can be the cultural sphere. Because you'll see that all these groups who when they're not in power, again, there's this quote from Children of Dune by Frank Herbert. I'm probably gonna butcher it, but something like, when I'm weak, I expect you to almost I'll have to get the exact wording, but it's basically it's kind of I expect you to treat me well, because it's according to your principles, but when I'm in power, when I'm strong, I can treat you as I like because that's in accordance with my principles, or something like that. And so it's this whole sort of idea where, when they're in power, whatever power this may be, they'll do as they please, and all those pretensions about justice or fairness or equality or egalitarianism go out the window. But then when it's the opposite, some of their powers, oh, please, please, please don't oppress us, or don't beat us down, or don't take this from us, or take that from us, And I think that's what most of, whatever sphere we're talking about, that's really what most of all this stuff is about, what it boils down to. It's like, okay, like getting power, getting money, and then being able to do as you please against those you don't like, or those you don't agree with, or just being able to do as you please in your life, that sort of thing. That's really all it's about. It's not about any of these other pretensions folks claim to have. And again, as much as I agree with a lot of the criticisms and the complaints a lot of my fellow generation has, I think I've just kind of accepted things, as it is. And maybe a lot of it has to tie in with the fact that, for the last, let's say 10 to 12 years, I've kind of looked at the world through the lens of having read the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And I don't see this as like about a certain ism or a group of iths or whatever, whatever dialectic conflict people want to paint the world as working under. It's more like, okay, like this stuff happens in an environment that is on the decline, Like I remember listening to a podcast like the last few months or so where they talked about, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and if folks who were living, through that, like what that was like for them. Were they aware of it? What was their perspective on it? And having read that, having read The Phoenix Principle and the Coming Dark Age by Mark Widdowson, having, as I said, read the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, or rather at least an abridged, version, having read numerous articles on different aspects of the decline of the Roman Empire, having listened to that podcast, whatever specific terminology one wants to use for this faction and that faction, and oh, well, it's all this group's fault or that group's fault or whatever, like, it feels like we're living through a similar, time as that. And obviously some of this probably is also coming from a certain podcast that I listen to. I'm sure if Alex sees this video, he'll probably shout it out. He knows. We've had our conversations. We've kind of been on the same wavelength about a lot of issues. But needless to say, like, I see it as being all the stuff that's going on as sort of part of that. And to look at it from a millennial's perspective, it's like, it's not all about this one group, and if we could just deal with them, or if we could just blah blah blah. It's not about that. It's not about whatever your outrage porn that you read or watch tells you. And I've seen it on both ends of the spectrum, politically speaking. I mean, this guy's he was talking about how he's reading a book about, like, oh, the far right and their plan to dominate, blah blah blah. And then I've unfortunately had family members who would read sort of the opposite end of the spectrum's equivalent of that, about, oh, it's the far left or whatever, their plan to blah blah blah. And it's like, it's none of those. It's almost like natural tendencies that occur within a civilization or a society or an environment, and as that sort of stuff progresses, you see certain events occur, and trends arise and that sort of thing. And whether you want to talk about civilization X, Y, Z, A, B, C, you parse things out, you put aside the stuff that's specific to that context, that civilization, that society, that culture, and you draw the similarities, you get these sorts of trends or patterns. And that's something that Mark Widdowson did in his work, and I wish more people would look into that and read that. And if he's still around, it'd be great if he got invited onto some podcasts so he could kind of put his perspective out there on these things, because he did some serious deep digging and deep dive into that. But the reason to sort of loop back, the reason I would say that, I don't like my generation, it's not I don't like everybody in it, that I hate my generation or so, but I think the certain salient points, or what people would say are the stereotypical millennial perspective, many ways I reject it. Like in that conversation with that guy, when I mentioned, I think about my grandparents' generation, because to me, in many ways, they're sort of a source of inspiration. Like, if they could overcome this, that, and the other, well, what am I doing? Why am I sitting here crying about this or whining about that? I'm gonna try and be, like they were, and I'm gonna try and overcome this, and I'm gonna be that, in my case, that strong man who survives the hard times, and makes good times in the future. I'm gonna do that sort of thing. But then he'll throw out there, oh well, your grandpa, he probably benefited from the GI Bill and trying to make it, bringing certain demographic identifiers that divide people into groups, as opposed to treating them as unified by some sort of experience of life, and that stuff, I'm not going to deny that it doesn't play a role. I mean, it definitely does, but at the same time, I find that it gets on my nerves increasingly. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I've experienced my fair share of prejudice in my life based upon those kind of demographic identifiers. And the people who are now squawking about that kind of stuff and wanting to, almost create division in society based off of those things, all in the name of, justice. So we're going to right these wrongs and all that. There are the very same people who were, abusing me on the basis of those kinds of identifiers, or B, they just were sat on the side, not doing anything. I guess I didn't fall into the right demographic for them to care about my experience of life, and what I had gone through or was going through. And, into this midst come the grifters who are just there to make money off that kind of stuff. And they exist, in my mind, I wouldn't see them as necessarily as individuals, but they're representative of trends and tendencies in a declining society, where sowing division, trying to get your lion's share of the money or the wealth or the power or what have you, becomes the goal. It's no longer about building things up, but it's about tearing things down and trying to, get your slice of the pie as big as you can. And, I read the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. I read the Phoenix Principle in the coming Dark Age. I've read so much about this sort of stuff, and I see that's what happened. There are folks who found some way to sort of manipulate or play the system, if you will, to the extent that they could get their hands on as much as possible. And the accumulation of, that kind of wealth in the hands of those people is a large part of what caused the decline and fall. It was no longer what it had once been. And, there comes a point where it's sort of if you're living in a situation like that, you kind of have to accept and make the best of it. And I suppose in some sense, maybe this is me looking at it, from a masculine perspective or so, but at the same time that I've sort of mapped all this out, I also like to look at the flip side of that. That, yes, there's this decline going on. These are these trends and tendencies. I don't want to, like I said, take that stereotypical millennial mindset of just complaining about how, oh, we didn't get to have this and we didn't get to have that, and now we got this debt and blah, blah, blah. And look, oh my God, consequences for bad actions. And also saying that, I don't believe it should be a life sentence if you messed up on what you chose to study in school or taking on debt or what have you. I also look at the flip side of it that, this kind of stuff also does create opportunity. Creates opportunity to rise up, if you will. But you have to be willing to do the work. And for me, that's been working overtime like a madman. My boss, he says, "Oh, you're a machine." Like, I don't know how you do 72 hours, 84 hours in a week, etc. But somehow I've been able to do that. You do that by working hard, making that money. At least in my case, it's been doing that, paying off my debts as fast as I can, because I look at the world and I see that, okay, I'm taking this as a wake-up call. Excuse me. I'm not taking this as something to, fuss about or complain about. I'm taking this as a wake-up call. Like, dude, you don't have the time to be, pardon my language, but mucking about with debt and credit cards and not taking care of your health, slacking off, laying about, doing that sort of thing. You don't have that, especially since I have pretty decent health right now. I don't have that luxury. I see things coming down the pipeline. I see what's taking form, and I'm like, okay, I can sit here and complain about this. I could say, oh, we need to, burn it all to the ground. We need to remake it in this form or that form, like a lot of these nutters want to say, millennial or otherwise. Or I could be like, hey, well, there's nothing new under the sun, and the flip side of decline or chaos or whatever you call it, it's opportunity. And no one's gonna come and rescue me. No one's coming to my rescue to save me. So I've gotta be my own hero. I've gotta make my own life. I've got to do the work. I got to make the right decisions. I need to make the right sacrifices to put myself in a much better spot, so that, assuming things really do turn out as bad as I see them turning out, that I'll make it through the night, so to speak. And this is why, I do not get involved with political movements. I don't get involved with different groups or perspectives on things for the most part. I definitely don't get involved with any groups, so to speak. And I guess you could say, I try to avoid getting into too many heated political discussions or what have you. I remain as apolitical as I possibly can, because, again, I don't see it being about any one particular faction or, group. When I say remaining apolitical, I mean, I mean that in general, not just about politics, but just non-aligned, with any particular group, because I've tried to see this from a much larger perspective, and from that much larger perspective, it's not about what you're told it's about. You ever discuss anything with somebody who's way off in one of these, in the weeds with one of these groups, whatever the group might be. It doesn't have to be political. It could be economic. It could be cultural. It could be religious. It could be whatever. they'll tell you, oh, it's all about, their worldview is it's all, this one group over here, and if we could just defeat them or get rid of them, we'll, we'll have paradise on earth or what have you. And they're wrong. That all of that kind of stuff. It's kind of like when I talk about, some of my no-fap videos back when I was thinking about a certain girl and that sort of thing. Just the fact that I was asking about, hey, like, how do I improve my experiences with women, or I like this one girl, like, how do I handle this sort of thing? It's like, just asking that question, as to some people, was, oh, you're a simp, you're a chump, and it's like, that itself was an indication not really of myself, or even them per se, but more like the cultural discourse around intergender relationships, and you could expand that out, like I've, done into other areas. It's this whole sort of like, a man wanting to figure out how he can get with a girl he likes. And let's assume that it's all that on the table potentially is marriage and kids. Just the guy wanting to do that, oh, that makes him a simp or a chump, viewing things in such a dichotomous, polarized manner, and that extends to so many other subjects or topics, like, that kind of divisiveness, polarized nature, fractal or fractured set of perspectives where things are just so to the extreme, so diametrically opposed, so just rabidly, vehemently against each other, where it's like I said, I guess that's something as basic as a guy wants to get with a girl. He's had bad experiences in the past. How does he not have another bad experience? He's asking about that. He's trying to get perspective on things. And it's like, oh, that guy's a simp. 50, 60, 70 years ago, it'd be like, no, he's not a simp necessarily. Could possibly be, but he's not necessarily a simp. He's just a dude. And she's just a girl. And a dude liking a girl, not a bad thing. A girl liking a dude, not a bad thing. Girl and dude get together, they date, they get into a long-term relationship, they get married, they have kids. Okay, cool. And that was like the norm, and that was considered all right. You see this sort of like narrative or pattern of like, living in a healthy, functional society versus living in an unhealthy, dysfunctional society. And, to sort of tie it all together, like, I think so much the reason why I don't, again, I don't know if this is the right way of putting it, but I quote, don't like my generation, is because a lot of cases they don't seem to get that. That's not one reason. Another reason is just the complaining and the critiquing and, somebody from 70 years ago wasn't a saint, so therefore we have to, dump all over everything they did in their whole lives, and, they didn't live up to our, extreme perfectionist moral and ethical standards, and they weren't pure as, the driven snow, so to speak. And so therefore they need to be, just completely banished out of existence. Like, that perspective is garbage as far as I'm concerned. And I say this even as, I'd also acknowledge that one of the points the guy did make about, like, a lot of student loan debt, it's almost like and this is the point that I've wanted to get across to certain YouTubers, who I otherwise, agree with a lot, and I respect their perspective and so on, but, whether it's student loan debt or it's a mortgage or it's like car loan debt or whatever, just debt in general, it's like when you're buried under a mountain of debt. I think I'd actually kind of I kind of made this point, but then he sort of reflected it back to me. Was like, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it's like they, et cetera, et cetera. And he kind of, followed it to its sort of its conclusion. But this whole idea that being in massive amounts of debt, for my generation, is student loan debt. For my parents, it would probably be like a mortgage. I don't know if you go further back. It seems like with my grandparents, they were, like sort of like penny pinchers, savers, that sort of thing. They because they'd gone through what they'd gone through, they learned the value of saving money. But if you're under massive amounts of debt, it basically makes you like an indentured servant. People will say, that things like debt is slavery and you're a debt slave, and in many ways it is kind of true. I mean, you think about the people you owe money to, they get a cut out of your paycheck, so they get a cut out of your like economic productivity, because as a result, like, you are essentially working for them to some extent or another. And if you owe way more than you make, I mean, they basically own you in a sense. So, I have my criticisms of my generation, and my, I would say like, oh, that, to use the expression, I don't like my generation. Maybe I've actually come to the conclusion that it's not that I don't like them. I just, I disagree with them on a lot of points, and I kind of distance myself from them because I kind of see myself as a bit atypical, typical in some ways, but atypical in others. Insofar as it's kind of like, okay, if you had like me with my debt, somebody else had the same amount of debt, but different perspective. Like, okay, I'm like, I got all this debt, but I'm gonna work it off, pay it off. I got a plan. I'm executing on it. It sucks, but I've accepted it. Versus someone who just wants to sit there and whine and cry and oh, I want to wait until the powers that be forgive it all and write it off. And it's like, okay, you can sit there and wait another decade or two, but me, I'm just gonna work my butt off, so to speak, and pay it all off, because I just don't expect them to do it, and I'm not gonna be angry or frustrated when they don't pay it off or don't forgive. I'm just gonna pay it off. I put my name on the dotted line. It sucks. You make some bad decisions in your life. You win some, you lose some. Now I'm gonna make the best of it. I'm gonna do what I gotta do to, to pay that all off. So, yeah. Maybe it's not that, again, that I don't. Maybe it's not that I don't like my generation, but I definitely I feel out of sync with them. I guess that's really the best way of putting it. I feel out of sync with them. In a lot of ways. Yeah. So, anywho, it's been a long rant. I don't even know if this will upload or what have you in time, but anyways, I'll see you folks around. I'm gonna go grab some to drink, and then I'm gonna hopefully just head to bed and knock out. So, see you folks around. Bye bye. Thanks for watching.